At exactly 45 seconds into the press conference, the room went silent. N'Golo Kanté was answering a question about Saturday's match against Arsenal. A routine question. A routine answer. His soft voice, slightly accented, explaining tactical adjustments in the second half. The journalists in the press room were typing on their laptops, checking their phones, waiting for something more interesting. It was Wednesday evening. Stamford Bridge. The familiar blue-branded backdrop behind him. Microphones clustered on the table. A bottle of water he hadn't touched. The standard post-training press availability that happened every week during the season. Everything was normal. Everything was routine. And then Kanté stopped speaking. Mid-sentence. His mouth closed. His hand, which had been gesturing gently to illustrate a tactical point, froze in the air. His eyes, those quiet, observant eyes that had tracked thousands of opponents across Premier League pitches, locked onto something in the front row. The journalist who had asked the question waited for him to continue. When he didn't, she glanced at her notepad, wondering if she'd missed something. Kanté's head tilted slightly to the left. His brow furrowed. Not in confusion. In recognition. "I'm sorry," he said quietly, his voice barely reaching the microphones. "Excuse me one moment." He stood up from the table. Not the casual standing of someone stretching between questions. This was deliberate. Purposeful. The Chelsea press officer, standing against the wall, straightened immediately. This wasn't protocol. Kanté never left the table during press conferences. In 12 years of professional football, through Leicester, through Chelsea, through France national team duties, he had always followed the routine perfectly. Kanté didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. He stepped around the table and walked directly toward the front row of journalists. His training kit still damp with sweat from the session that had ended 30 minutes earlier. His boots had been changed for sneakers, but he still wore his Chelsea training gear. The journalists in the front row looked up, confused. Some lowered their recording devices. Others glanced at each other, uncertain what was happening. Kanté stopped in front of an elderly man sitting in the center of the front row. The man was in his 70s, white hair thinning, face weathered by years. He wore a worn Leicester City scarf around his neck, the blue and white instantly recognizable, startlingly out of place in Chelsea's press room. In his trembling hands he held an old photograph. The edges were worn, the colors faded, the kind of photo that had been carried and looked at countless times. The man's eyes were wet with tears. His mouth moved but no sound came out. Kanté crouched down in front of him, bringing himself to eye level. The entire press room had gone completely silent. Cameras that had been recording routine content suddenly captured something else entirely. "Monsieur Fournier?" Kanté said softly. "Is that you?" The old man nodded, unable to speak. He extended the photograph with shaking hands. Kanté took it carefully. Looked at it. And his entire expression changed. To understand what happened next, you need to understand what happened 9 years earlier. May 2015. Leicester City had just survived relegation by a miracle. They'd been bottom of the Premier League table in April, 7 points from safety with 9 games remaining. Everyone had written them off. The bookmakers had already paid out on their relegation. But they'd won 7 of those final 9 games. Impossible. Unprecedented. They'd stayed up on the final day of the season. N'Golo Kanté had joined Leicester that summer from SM Caen in France. A relatively unknown signing. £5.6 million. Most fans had never heard of him. The local newspapers barely mentioned the transfer. Kanté arrived in Leicester speaking limited English, knowing no one, living alone in a small flat near the training ground. He drove a Mini Cooper that had seen better days. He ate lunch alone in cafeterias. He was 24 years old, and in a foreign country for the first time in his life. The 2015-16 season started quietly. Kanté played every match. He ran more than anyone on the pitch. He won the ball back in positions that seemed impossible. He never complained. never argued with referees, never celebrated when he scored, which was rare anyway. By October, people started noticing. By December, they couldn't look away. By March, Leicester City was top of the Premier League and the whole world was watching the impossible unfold. But this story isn't about Leicester winning the Premier League. Everyone knows that story. This story is about what happened in January 2016, when no one was watching. Leicester was playing an FA Cup third-round match against Tottenham at White Hart Lane. Kanté wasn't in the starting lineup. Claudio Ranieri was rotating the squad, keeping his key players fresh for the league title chase. Kanté sat on the bench in his tracksuit, watching the match. Leicester was losing 2-0. The magic that worked in the league wasn't translating to the cup. It didn't matter. Everyone knew the league was what counted. The FA Cup was a distraction. During halftime, Kanté stood up to walk back toward the tunnel. And that's when he saw the man. An elderly gentleman, maybe in his mid-60s then, sitting in the wheelchair section near the tunnel entrance. He wore a Leicester scarf. His hands were clasped in his lap. He was crying quietly, wiping his eyes with the edge of his scarf. Kanté stopped. The rest of the Leicester team filed past him into the tunnel. The stadium was half empty. It was a cold Tuesday night in January, and Leicester fans hadn't made the trip south in large numbers for a cup match they didn't expect to win. Kanté approached the man. "Excuse me, sir," he said in his careful English. "Are you okay?" The man looked up, startled to see a Leicester player standing in front of him. "Oh, I'm fine, son. Don't worry about an old man." But Kanté didn't move. "You are crying. Something is wrong." The man smiled sadly. "It's nothing. I probably shouldn't have come. It's a long journey from Leicester. And we're losing anyway. I should have stayed home." "You came alone?" "My son usually brings me. But he passed away 3 months ago. Cancer. He loved Leicester. We had season tickets together for 40 years. When you lot started winning this season, it's the first time I felt." He stopped, composing himself. "I thought maybe if I came to a match, I'd feel close to him again. Stupid, I know." Kanté crouched down, exactly as he would do 9 years later in that press room. "What was your son's name?" "Richard. Richard Fournier." "Mr. Fournier," Kanté said quietly, "your son would be proud you came. That you still support the team. That you made this journey. I don't know. We're losing. He would have hated seeing them lose." Kanté glanced back at the tunnel, then at the scoreboard showing 2-0. He reached into his tracksuit pocket and pulled out a pen. One of the big pens players used to sign autographs. "Do you have paper?" Kanté asked. The old man fumbled in his coat pocket and produced a crumpled match program. Kanté wrote something on it, folded it, and placed it in Mr. Fournier's hand. "Don't read this now. Read it when you get home. And know that your son is watching. He sees you here. He's proud." Before the man could respond, Kanté jogged back toward the tunnel. The second half was about to start. Leicester lost that match 2-0. It didn't matter. For months later, they won the Premier League. Subscribe and leave a comment, because the most important part of this story is still unfolding. Mr. Fournier went home that night and opened the program. On it, Kanté had written in careful handwriting, "Mr. Fournier, your son Richard is with you. Every match. Every moment. When Leicester wins the league this year, we win it for supporters like you. Keep his scarf. Keep coming. We play for people like Richard." N'Golo Kanté, January 2016 inch. It was dated and signed. Mr. Fournier kept that program in a frame beside his bed. And he kept coming to matches. All through that impossible spring of 2016. Every home game. Sometimes traveling to away matches when his health allowed. He wore Richard's scarf. He cheered. He cried when they won the title. After Leicester won the Premier League, Mr. Fournier tried to find Kanté to thank him. But by then, Kanté was fielding offers from every major club in Europe. Chelsea paid £32 million for him that summer. The quiet midfielder who'd been unknown a year earlier was suddenly one of the most sought-after players in world football. Mr. Fournier sent letters to Chelsea. They never reached Kanté. He tried calling the club. Security protocols made it impossible. Kanté had moved to London, to a different life, to Champions League football and World Cup glory with France. The years passed. Mr. Fournier grew older. His health declined. He couldn't travel to matches anymore. But he watched every Leicester match on television. And sometimes, when Leicester played Chelsea, he would sit in his living room, wearing Richard's scarf, looking at that framed program, and wonder if Kanté remembered that night in January 2016. He wondered if one moment of kindness, given in a half-empty stadium to a grieving old man, had meant anything to someone whose life had become so much bigger. Away from the cameras, Kanté made a choice no one expected. Wednesday evening, January 2025. 9 years after that FA Cup match. Mr. Fournier's nephew worked as a freelance sports journalist. He covered lower league matches mostly, but occasionally got credentials for Premier League press conferences. That week, he'd been assigned to cover Chelsea's midweek media availability. His uncle had asked him for a favor. A strange favor. Could he bring him to a Chelsea press conference? Just once? Just to be in the same room as Kanté again? The nephew thought it was a terrible idea. Press conferences were strictly for working media. His elderly uncle in a wheelchair would draw attention. It violated protocol. He could lose his credentials. But his uncle had been insistent. "I'm 80 years old," Mr. Fournier said. "I've been diagnosed with congestive heart failure. The doctors say I have months, maybe a year. I just want to see him one more time. To say thank you. That's all." So the nephew had snuck him in. Wheelchair-accessible entrance. Arrived late, after the press conference started. Sat in the front row hoping no one would notice an old man in a Leicester scarf at a Chelsea presser. Mr. Fournier had brought the photograph. Not the program, that was too precious to risk losing. But a photograph of his son Richard, taken at the King Power Stadium in 2016, wearing his Leicester scarf, smiling, just weeks before the cancer diagnosis. He'd planned to hold it up. To see if Kanté might glance his way. Maybe catch his eye. Maybe remember. He never expected Kanté to stop mid-sentence. Now, in that silent press room, Kanté held the photograph of Richard Fournier. He looked at it for a long moment. Then he looked at the old man crouched in front of him. "You kept coming to matches," Kanté said quietly. Not a question. A statement. Mr. Fournier nodded, tears streaming down his weathered face. "Every match I could. You told me to keep his scarf. Keep coming." So I did. And Leicester won. "We won," Mr. Fournier whispered. "For Richard. Like you promised." The journalists in the room had their recording devices pointed at this exchange. Some were crying. The Chelsea press officer had abandoned any thought of ending this moment. Whatever was happening, it was bigger than protocol. Kanté stood up. He reached into his training kit pocket and pulled out his captain's armband from that day's training session. He knelt down again and carefully wrapped it around Mr. Fournier's wrist. "You kept your promise to Richard," Kanté said softly. "You kept coming. You kept believing. This is for both of you." Mr. Fournier clutched the armband to his chest, sobbing. Kanté embraced him there in the front row while cameras captured what would become one of football's most profound moments. The press conference never resumed. Kanté sat with Mr. Fournier for 20 minutes, talking quietly about Richard, about Leicester, about that impossible season. The journalists watched in silence, understanding they were witnessing something that transcended sport. Share and subscribe, some stories deserve to be remembered. Mr. Fournier died 4 months later, peacefully, with Richard's scarf draped over his hospital bed and Kanté's captain's armband still wrapped around his wrist. His nephew reported that his final words were, "Tell N'Golo I kept coming." Kanté attended the funeral. He brought the entire Chelsea squad. And at the service, displayed beside the coffin, was that crumpled match program from January 2016, Kanté's handwritten promise preserved in its frame. Real power isn't in trophies. It's in remembering one person when the world tells you to forget.